Flashes of red and blue flickered across the still waters of Silverpine Lake, slicing through the quiet night like a warning. My daughter, startled, dropped the marshmallow she'd been roasting. The sudden arrival of 2 police cruisers shattered the calm, their high beams illuminating our modest campsite in stark, uninvited white. My wife instinctively pulled our son close as 2 uniformed officers stepped out, their flashlights darting from our tents to our fire pit like they were scanning a crime scene. "Good evening," said one of them, his voice measured but wary. "We received a report of unauthorized camping and possible property damage. We'll need to see some identification and any permits you have." I stood slowly, keeping my hands where they could see them, and retrieved my wallet and a small folder I always carried. "Certainly, officer. My name's Marcus Thompson. This is my family, and we're camping on our land." I handed him my license and the folder, which held everything from the property deed to topographical survey maps, and my federal identification. The officer raised an eyebrow as he examined the documents. His partner leaned in, whispering something I caught just enough of, something about federal boundaries. I pointed toward the row of oversized houses glowing across the lake. "I'm guessing the complaint came from that side. Possibly someone named Karen Whitfield." The look the officers exchanged said enough. "You're saying this is federal land?" the officer asked. "Partially," I replied. "But this particular stretch is private. My great-grandfather purchased it in 1923. It's been in my family ever since. The government established the Cascade National Wildlife Reserve in 1967, and our parcel now shares a boundary with the protected zone. I'm also the senior ranger for this district, so whoever made the call might want to read up on where their HOA stops." Before we found ourselves defending a peaceful family camping trip under strobing police lights, things had seemed simpler. Every summer since I was 5, we've returned to this exact spot, 2 tents facing the sunrise, a dock where the kids launch their kayaks, and a fire pit where we roast dinner and tell stories until late. It's our tradition, our retreat from everything noisy and artificial. Trouble started about 3 months back, when the HOA from a nearby development called Sunset Ridge Estates began flexing its self-declared authority. That subdivision popped up just a couple years ago. Neatly trimmed lawns, cookie-cutter houses, every mailbox and flower bed practically cloned. I wasn't thrilled seeing it creep up the hillside, but I figured as long as they stayed on their side we wouldn't have any problems. Then came Karen Whitfield. From what the local rumor mill says, she relocated from California with her husband, some tech executive who works remotely. Within weeks of arrival, she'd not only started the HOA but installed herself as president and began micromanaging everything in sight, from fence heights to mailbox colors. Our paths first crossed in early June. I was clearing out some debris near the dock in preparation for our family trip when I heard a voice, sharp and insistent. "Excuse me? Excuse me, sir." She emerged from the tree line like she owned the woods. Athleisure outfit, spotless white sneakers, giant sunglasses. Her hands went to her hips like she was ready to issue a fine. "What do you think you're doing?" she snapped. I wiped my brow. "Clearing my land. Can I help you with something?" She scoffed. "Your land? I think you're mistaken. This is Sunset Ridge HOA common area. We have strict regulations about unauthorized activity in shared spaces." I couldn't help but laugh. "Ma'am, this property's been in my family since before your HOA existed, probably before your grandparents were born. You're standing on private land." She flushed bright red. "That's impossible. I have maps that show this entire shoreline belongs to our development." "Then your maps are wrong," I said and went back to work. She fumbled for her phone. "I'm recording this vandalism. You'll be hearing from our legal team." "I'll be sure to pencil that in," I replied as she stormed off, dictating furious notes into her phone like a suburban general preparing for war. I figured that was the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, we arrived for our annual trip only to find orange warning signs nailed to trees around our site. "Private property. Sunset Ridge, and no trespassing." My wife Sarah tore them down with a sigh. "They can't be serious," she said. "Apparently they are," I replied, tossing the signs onto the kindling pile. We set up camp anyway like always. Our daughter Emma raced down to check the old rope swing, while Jake, our youngest, collected rocks for one of his lake sculptures. The evening passed like magic. burgers sizzling, ghost stories around the fire, stars peeking through the pines. The peace didn't last long. It was the second evening when she came back. Karen, this time flanked by two women who looked like clones of her, stood at the edge of our clearing. She wore a lanyard with HOA President, printed in bold letters, and carried a clipboard like it was gospel. "I see you ignored our notices," she said sweetly, venom laced in her tone. I stood slowly. "Mrs. Whitfield, I removed signs you had no right to post. This is my family's land." "Our records say otherwise," she huffed, holding up the clipboard like it could banish me. "This entire lakeside falls under HOA jurisdiction. You're in violation of 17 separate bylaws." Sarah stepped forward, calm but firm. "We have ownership documents going back 100 years. We are not and have never been part of your HOA. Karen's companions whispered behind cupped hands as she bristled. "Paperwork can be forged," she said. "Our attorney has been notified, and I'm filing a formal complaint with the county." "Please do," I said. "And while you're at it, have them brush up on federal land boundaries and what it means to interfere with the duties of a federal officer." Her eyes narrowed. "Is that a threat?" "No. It's a courtesy," I replied. "This land touches protected reserve territory. I'm the senior ranger responsible for this region. I suggest you tread carefully." She laughed, sharp and brittle. "A park ranger? That's cute. Well, ranger, your tints are lowering property values. I can see the smoke from my back patio. It's a health hazard." Jake tugged on my shirt. "Dad, why is the angry lady yelling?" "Because some people think the whole world should play by their rules," I said loud enough for Karen to hear. Her mouth twisted. "You'll be hearing from the authorities. Sunset Ridge doesn't tolerate vagrancy." And for the next 3 days she escalated. She took photos from the ridge above our camp. She filed noise complaints over our campfire songs. She even contacted the health department, claiming we were polluting the lake. Never mind the composting system that's been in place for decades. But the final straw came on the 4th night. Emma caught her first trout, and we were gathered around celebrating when we heard the distant wail of sirens. 2 cruisers made their way up the dirt road. Which brings us back to the flashing lights and the officers reviewing my ID, while Karen watched smugly from the shadows. Only this time her expression changed as the officer closed the folder, turned to her and said, "Ma'am, it appears this family is well within their rights. And unless you have some official business with federal land management, I suggest you return to your property." The look on her face was worth every bit of trouble she caused. The sky had just started to dim when the red and blue lights painted the treetops with their flickering glow. Their reflections rippled across the still surface of Silver Pine Lake as the patrol cars pulled up, flooding our campsite with harsh beams that chased away the peaceful twilight. Emma dropped her marshmallow stick, startled, while Sarah instinctively pulled Jake close. 2 officers emerged from their cruiser, their flashlights slicing through the dark like searchlights. "Good evening," said the lead officer, keeping his tone professional but guarded. "We're following up on a report. Mind if we take a look at some identification?" I handed over the necessary documents without fuss. He reviewed them carefully, then turned to his partner. "Get dispatch on the line with State Fish and Wildlife. We need clarification on jurisdiction and boundaries." After a few more moments, he returned my papers with an apologetic nod. "Mr. Thompson, sorry for the interruption. We're obligated to check out any complaint, but this might be a simple mix-up." "No confusion at all," I replied. "Mrs. Whitfield has been repeatedly told this is private land, outside the HOA's authority. On top of that, I've got ongoing work here under federal wildlife programs. She's interfering with that." The radio on the officer's shoulder crackled, and a back and forth full of codes followed. By the time the conversation ended, his entire demeanor shifted, not toward me but in frustration aimed elsewhere. "State Fish and Wildlife just confirmed your claims," he said. "Your land is within federal parameters, and they're actually very interested in what's happening here. There have been reports of construction activities pushing into protected areas." I nodded. "The Sunset Ridge development's been crossing lines for a while. I've filed complaints about pollution runoff and light disturbances near the reserve." Jake leaned toward me, whispering, "Is Mrs. Whitfield in trouble?" The officer must have overheard. Filing a false police report is a misdemeanor. If this becomes harassment of a federal contractor. He didn't finish, but the implication hung heavy. His partner was still jotting things down. Would you like to file an official complaint? He asked. I thought about it. Not today. But please document this incident and make it clear to Mrs. Whitfield that this is federal land. Maybe a firm reminder about the limits of HOA power. They agreed and headed up the hill, where Karen stood waiting with her arms defiantly folded. From a distance I watched her posture shift, first confident, then uneasy, then frantic, as one officer pointed out the federal markers I'd placed long ago. The reflective tape made them unmistakable. The next morning, I received a call from the Regional Fish and Wildlife Director. News had made its way up the chain fast. Marcus, Director Coleman said, we've been looking to increase educational outreach around the reserve. Your land is in an ideal spot to serve as an access point. Would you be open to collaborating? Of course, I said, glancing over at my kids skipping stones. What do you have in mind? Their vision was thorough. They proposed installing boundary markers, informational kiosks, and upgrading the old access road, all while preserving the natural environment. It would legally reinforce the land's protected status and place it permanently outside HOA interference. Meanwhile, Karen was dealing with her own unraveling narrative. The false report triggered a deeper look into HOA practices. Homeowners who'd been quietly bullied into paying fines or conforming to questionable rules started pushing back. The broader community began to question where HOA authority actually stopped, and where it had gone too far. 3 weeks later, I was out with the survey team marking new federal lines when she approached once more. Her appearance was starkly different, less polished, no lanyard or clipboard, and her voice held an unfamiliar hesitance. Mr. Thompson, she began, I wanted to talk to you about the investigation. I cut her off. My attorney advised against discussing anything with you directly, Mrs. Whitfield. Her face flushed with indignation. Your attorney? This whole thing is absurd. I was just trying to protect the neighborhood. By harassing landowners? By fabricating reports? By claiming power over land you don't own? I said flatly. The board map said. She began. That doesn't give you the right to act like a sheriff, I said. An HOA president isn't a title that comes with federal authority. One of the surveyors looked up. Ma'am, you're standing on protected land right now. I'll need you to step back behind that boundary marker. She glanced down, stunned. This is reserve land? We're over 50 feet in. Has been since the 60s, the surveyor confirmed. The realization hit her hard. Not only had she tried to impose HOA rules on my property, she'd crossed into federally controlled territory, making her actions far more serious than she likely imagined. 2 days later, the HOA board held an emergency session. I didn't go, but one of the other parents filled us in. Karen had attempted to deflect blame to past leadership, but the homeowners weren't buying it. The moment they realized she'd placed the entire association at legal risk, the vote to remove her was swift and unanimous. Even Karen couldn't justify her position anymore. But that wasn't the end. The federal inquiry unearthed that HOA funds had been used to maintain land the association had no right to touch. What started as a dispute became a potential case of fraud. Things escalated quickly after that. The state attorney filed charges: false reporting, harassment of a federal contractor, and misuse of association funds. By the time we were putting up new signs with the kids, signs about conservation and public access, Karen's life was being boxed up into a moving truck. Jake pointed. Dad, look. Across the lake, Karen stood watching the movers with a defeated look. She was no longer the self-appointed neighborhood queen but a shadow of that person, stripped of power, humbled by the law she once ignored. 3 months later, I saw her again at the federal courthouse. She'd accepted a plea deal, 2 years of probation, a hefty $50,000 fine, and mandatory conservation work. The judge also banned her from holding any HOA position for a decade. As the sentence was read, she stared at the floor. The woman who once tried to rule by intimidation would now spend her weekends picking up trash in the very woods she tried to control. She glanced up once as she left the courtroom. For a heartbeat, our eyes met. There was no fire left in hers, just the quiet recognition of a lesson learned too late. Some lines once crossed don't just push back. They push back hard.